Good afternoon and good evening, everyone. My name is Morgan Gillespie. I'm the Executive Director of the Food and Land Use Coalition, and I will be leading you through this evening's exciting event. It is an absolute pleasure for me to open this session on unlocking sustainable investment for sustainable agriculture. Before we begin, 2 quick housekeeping points. You're going to see a Slido QR code on the screen shortly. Please do scan it now. It's your channel for questions, for upvoting the points you want the panel to prioritize, and for sharing any commitments or investment intentions during the session today. As you can also see, we do have simultaneous translation in English and in Portuguese. And if you need a headset, please raise your hand. If you can't hear me, please raise your hand and we can have some people help you out. I'll also flag that we are live streaming this now, so welcome to everybody online tuning in from all around the world. We're here at COP30 in Belém in Brazil, and we're going to have a fantastic panel for you all. Now, what are we here to talk about today? Sustainable agriculture really sits at the center of climate stability, of food security, and of course, of nature protection. Around the world, we are now, and some might say finally, seeing practical solutions, from regenerative systems to blended finance structures. And these systems and these financial mechanisms are proving concretely that we can improve our yields, that we can restore our soils, and that we can strengthen our rural economies. Now, today's session is really about those solutions, and specifically about the partnerships and the financial mechanisms that can take them from merely promising to truly scalable. Countries like Brazil and like the UK have been and continue to show leadership, including through the RAIZ initiative that I had the great pleasure of launching earlier today with both Minister Cray and with Nick. And these new platforms are helping us to design investment tools and deliver the enabling conditions necessary to make sustainable agriculture investable at scale. But rather than looking backward, today's session is about looking forward, right? This is an action-oriented COP. And we want to understand what can be moved forward in the next 12 to 18 months. What models are generally ready to scale? What instruments can both reduce the risk for farmers and for investors? And most importantly, where are the opportunities for new commitments and collaboration? We have 2 excellent panels for you today, from government to finance to implementation. And I have asked them, and I will challenge them, to make sure that they share concrete insights, things that are practical and actionable. And we do want this to be a participatory discussion, so please use Slido throughout. We have the team that'll be checking the questions and they'll be feeding them to me. And our aim is very simple. I want you all to leave this room today with clarity, with momentum, and with a set of actions that can help us to unlock the capital that is needed to drive sustainable agriculture at scale. And with that, it is my great pleasure to invite the UK Minister to set the challenge and help frame the discussion ahead. Minister Cray, please join us.
Thank you so much, Morgan. Last time I stood up to speak here, there was an enormous thunderclap. So at least we don't have to fight with the rain and the thunder at this point. What a pleasure it is to join you here in the UK Pavilion at COP30. Let me begin by congratulating Brazil on a successful COP presidency and for their focus on sustainable agriculture. Agriculture sits at the nexus of climate change, biodiversity loss, and land degradations, those 3 crucial pillars of the Rio Conventions. It's at the core of our culture, our food, and our economy. Almost half of the world's population rely on agri-food systems for their livelihoods, and we depend on them for the basics of life. Agriculture depends on nature and a stable climate, and it cannot survive without the ecosystem services provided by healthy soils, thriving forests, and clean water. And we can't survive either. Natural loss is also economic loss. We cannot expect growth and resilience from food systems that are relying on ecosystems which are being degraded. Systems which rely on a climate changing faster than they and we can adapt to. Biodiversity loss leaves agricultural systems more vulnerable to pests, pathogens, and pollinator loss, and climate change. And we know the impacts only get worse with warmer average temperatures. Unsustainable land uses are destroying the same natural systems that agricultural production depends upon. For the last 50 years, the biggest driver of habitat loss has been the conversion of natural ecosystems either for crop production or for pasture. 52% of agricultural land is already degraded, and that costs the world $400 billion each year in lost productivity. An estimated 1.1 trillion are required each year between now and 2030 to align our global food systems with low emissions and climate resilient development. And yet, agri-food systems receive just 7.2% of total climate finance, and only 0.8% of that reaches smallholder farmers. So we need a systemic change in how we finance our agricultural sector. We need transformation at scale. I spoke too soon. Here comes the thunder. Okay. But this is why we're here at the gateway to the Amazon, right? As a reminder of the challenges that we face. And as I said at home in the UK, we have Yorkshire in drought, we have Wales in flood, and we have London under snow. So we're having all three seasons together in our country, things that have never happened in the UK before. So the changing climate is no longer a future threat. We can no longer afford to talk about it as a future threat. It is present, it is here, it is a danger to us and to everything that we hold dear. But we do know what good looks like, and we do know what works. We have progress, for example, on biodiversity credits, on blended finance, on new funding models, and on brilliant technical assistance. So why can't we scale and replicate these successes? Mobilising finance is key to transforming agriculture and food systems to meet our climate and nature targets. We will continue to leverage our multilateral relationships and to build those public-private partnerships to build consensus, improve the data, and make sure that investment can flow. We need to take these discussions from this session and beyond out of this COP with just 2 days left to ensure that we improve our financial systems to support sustainable agriculture. I look forward to a good discussion with you today.
Thank you, Minister, for laying out the challenges and the opportunities so clearly in front of us, and for dealing so eloquently with the weather as it rains down on us here. I'm going to move now to our first panel. And I'm honored to welcome three distinguished leaders. We have Minister Cray already on stage with us, the Minister of Nature for the UK government. I'd like to welcome Carlos Sinesto Agustin, the Chief Special Advisor to the Minister of Agriculture and Livestock for the Government of Brazil. Carlos, please join us on stage. And last but certainly not least, Nick Blong, the First Assistant Secretary for Sustainability, Climate and Strategy from the Australian government. Now, the purpose of this is really to facilitate a country-to-country dialogue, a chance to hear directly from governments who are the ones shaping our national policies, incentives, and the investment frameworks for sustainable agriculture. This is a ministerial level conversation, and so we'll begin with short opening statements before moving to a more interactive fireside discussion. I might join you sitting down here. To kick us off, however, I'd like to start by asking all three of you, in preparation of your opening statements, and Nick, let me start with you. Across your economies, what levers are actually working to drive finance into sustainable agriculture at scale? What's proving most effective? And please let us know why. Nick, to you.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? Excellent, thank you. Just wave if that changes, or I can wait for the rain. Thank you for inviting me to this afternoon's discussion. So I guess in Australia, with respect to sustainable agriculture and climate finance, we sort of have a different layers of support available. First and foremost is a type of climate finance really focused on building up sort of management capability and showcasing alternate sustainable farming practices. And so we have a climate smart agriculture program, which my team back in Canberra manages, which is about a $300 million program really focused on grants to communities and groups of farmers and producer groups that sort of enable them to put on events and showcase what alternate production systems could look like in different regions. Obviously, Australia is a very diverse agricultural country. Tropics up in the north, temperate climates and cool climates down south. Not quite as cold as London right now, but a very diverse climate from north to south and east to west. So that means sustainable practices that work in one region won't work in another, either because of the climate, the soils, and the topography. Lots of different reasons. Also, different climates are feeling the impacts of climate change differently, which means there's no one-size-fits-all approach. So we don't have a program in Australia where this is how you should farm, this is right, this is wrong. It's more about enabling farmers to sort of observe what different ways of farming could look like for their particular region and their particular sort of mixed farming enterprise, whether it's livestock, cropping or horticulture or what have you, or agroforestry. And also, I guess, the lesson we've clearly observed over many decades, and this won't be a surprise, I don't think, is farmers don't usually rely on government for advice about how to farm. They're not usually their most trusted, reliable source of information about good farming. And farmers typically look over the fence to see what other farmers are doing. And there's that they want to see new technologies or new practices showcased, proven to work, because really these types of practice changes need to provide a productivity dividend for farmers to really incentivise practice change. It just doesn't happen out of goodwill. Those climate smart grants is one aspect, and there's also some emerging markets which the government sort of backs. One is around emerging carbon markets, carbon credits, and so this provides a new opportunity for farmers to diversify their on-farm income through carbon projects. It's not for every farmer because it does lock up agricultural land for different uses, like agricultural forestry, agroforestry, for example. But it is a way of accessing new streams of income, and you can integrate it with farming systems for shelter belts that have double dividends in terms of benefits for livestock management and wind protection and things like that. There's also an emerging biodiversity market, which was only legislated in Australia last year. So this is a new market, and the goal is to provide landholders with an opportunity to be rewarded for the environmental services that they provide. Now, this is still in its infancy, but the mechanism now exists, and now work is underway to develop new methodologies so that new biodiversity projects can come online. It's a bit different to carbon projects because biodiversity projects will differ, whether it's the type of vegetation, the biodiversity in question, the climate, the environment sort of that the farm is based in. So it's a bit more challenging and complex, but the mechanism is there, and we're now in the process of developing new methods so that new biodiversity credits can be rewarded or awarded to farmers, and it's a voluntary scheme. So this is it's all around sort of incentivizing practice change, showcasing what's possible, and providing more of a carrot rather than a stick to sort of really drive scaling up of sustainable agricultural practices. I can leave it there if you like.
No, that was fantastic. And what I love, Nick, about your commentary is it's a really good mix of the old and the new. I think we all recognize that farmers listen to farmers first, right? That's not necessarily new, but a lot of the levers that you're pulling now are new. They're innovative, carbon markets, biodiversity markets. And so I think this merging is quite interesting. Carlos, we're going to come to you next. Folks, this is João. He's very kindly going to do some live translation for us, which is absolutely fantastic. So Carlos, over to you. And same question, across your economies, particularly in Brazil, what levers do you believe are working to drive finance into sustainable agriculture at scale?
Então, Carlos, vou traduzir para você, tá? A sua apresentação também. Então, aqui a pergunta é através das economias, quais são as alavancas que você reconhece que podem ajudar a mobilizar o financiamento para a agricultura sustentável em maior escala?
Bom, neste momento nós estamos realmente iniciando um modelo de agricultura sustentável que vai ter grande escala no Brasil. Nós estamos falando... Sim, sim.
So in this moment we are beginning. Okay, good. Okay, so in this moment we are starting a new initiative in Brazil that's really going to be able to scale up sustainable agriculture.
Estamos falando de algo em torno de 5 a 6 bilhões de dólares.
We are talking about a business that's about $5 or $6 billion.
Para ser emprestado aos agricultores com 10 anos, com 2 anos de carência, e um juro em torno de 8%, que é um juro excepcionalmente baixo para o Brasil.
Yeah, so this money is going to be lent to farmers with a lot of benefits compared to the market in terms of interest rates, so that the farmers can take up this new credit with incentives.
Quando nós estamos falando de uma agricultura no Brasil de médio para grande, a coisa mais sensível para o agricultor é a taxa de juros.
When we are talking about the medium to large scale agriculture in Brazil, the interest rate is the biggest challenge for the farmer.
E nós colocamos nesse programa critérios muito duros de sustentabilidade.
And we've included in this program very serious environmental criteria.
Número 1, não pode haver emissões maior no ano 10, que é o fim do financiamento, do que no ano 0. Tem que ser igual ou menor emissão.
So the first criteria is that emissions should be lower or equal to the year 1 in comparison to the year 10. So it's a 10-year program and emissions should be equal or lower. It cannot be higher.
Nós vamos exigir uma coisa que não é comum no Brasil, não sei se é comum em outro país, balanço de carbono, porque o agricultor sabe fazer seu balanço financeiro. Agora, a cada ano, ele deverá fazer seu balanço de carbono, para ele saber como que ele está, se ele está para cima, se ele está para baixo.
And as part of this measurement, we are going to have to introduce in Brazil the carbon accounting, so that in addition to the usual financial accounting that farmers usually do, they are going to introduce this new measurement so that we can keep track of progress.
Boas práticas agrícolas, no-till, cover crop, uso de bioinsumos, tudo isso vai estar contemplado no plano.
So sustainable agriculture practices such as no tillage, integration crop livestock forests, and other low emission agriculture practices will be incorporated into this program.
Também coisas relativas às certificações trabalhistas também terão obrigatoriedade no plano.
And also, labor standards and regulations will be very seriously followed as part of this program.
Porém, quero dizer a vocês que são europeus que mesmo juros baratos vindo de outros países, quando chega ao Brasil e nós temos que fazer conversão, nada funciona porque na conversão o juro fica caro.
Yeah, so he's talking about the challenge of the hedge because of the interest rates practiced in different parts of the world. So even when farmers, they can get a credit that's lower rate in other parts of the world, when you convert in currency terms, it's still very high for farmers in Brazil.
Então, nesse primeiro momento, que nós temos esse volume bom de dinheiro, que podemos fazer de 2 a 3 milhões de hectares nesse primeiro tranche de dinheiro.
So with this first flow of investment, it's possible to do between 2 and 3 million hectares of restored degraded lands.
Lembrando que o Brasil tem uma área de cultivo anual, área física, em torno de 50 milhões de hectares. Como nós estamos falando de um crescimento de 2 a 3% ao ano, nos próximos anos, só com esse financiamento.
Yeah, and we're talking about 50 million hectares of growing area in Brazil, and we are expecting 2 to 3% increase in area each year.
Mas sempre lembrando que nós não estamos falando de novas áreas que terão desmatamento. Nada disso vai ter desmatamento. Tudo isso é feito em áreas com baixo potencial produtivo, pastagens ruins. Portanto, o programa não admite novo desmatamento. É melhorar áreas que estão com baixa produtividade.
Yeah, it's important to emphasize that this new and additional area is not coming from deforested area. It's coming from this restored, degraded land that's not productive at the moment. So through this initiative, they are going to recover this land and include in this to increase food security and production.
Nesse primeiro momento, essa conversão de dinheiro, esse custo da conversão do dinheiro, o Tesouro Nacional Brasileiro está cobrindo. Mas nós não vamos poder trabalhar com isso por resto da vida. Nós vamos ter que achar outras fontes.
Yeah, so he's talking about the currency costs to make this conversion of capital from like foreign sources to Brazil. It's still very expensive. The government of Brazil, through the Treasury, has been investing a lot in this, but it's not sustainable over time, so we're going to have to find other sources as well.
Estamos propondo novos modelos, convidamos países estrangeiros a participar de um novo modelo de equity, onde o capital estrangeiro será sócio da terra do agricultor brasileiro, porém minoritário. E com isso ele põe dinheiro e valoriza a terra. Esse é o modelo que nós queremos implantar no ano que vem para ter mais recursos.
So he's talking about new arrangements that have been thought of to support this, for example, participation of the investors as minority shareholders as part of the farms, so that they can participate while they invest.
Também estamos satisfeitos com o lançamento do programa RAIZ, pensando que assim o mundo inteiro, podemos conectar o mundo inteiro para essa atribuição de conseguir mais fundos para continuar o programa.
And we are very happy to be able to announce today the RAIZ initiative has just been launched. This initiative that Brazil is proposing to recover degraded lands across the globe. This is something that we expect that can mobilize further action and investment for land restoration.
Também estamos dispostos a qualquer pergunta de esclarecimento.
Yeah, obrigado. Thanks. And any questions we'll be answering soon.
Thank you so much, Carlos. And before we come to you, Minister Cray, I've been reliably informed that the headsets are now working. So if you all want to try again, put them on. You should be able to hear me on channel 18. And you could hear live translation on channel 19. Working? No. Okay. We tried. We tried again. Minister Gray, I love your patience. Thank you. Back over to you for your opening statement, but again, through the framing of across the UK economy specifically, what levers are actually working to drive finance into sustainable agriculture.
Thanks so much, Morgan. I think we should give a massive round of applause to João for doing that sort of instant translation. Our hero, we are so lucky to have you working with us here in Brazil, João. You've been an absolute saint over the last week. Thank you so much. So what are we doing in the UK? First of all, we are investing in nature resilient agriculture, both at home and abroad. The first is to support our UK farmers, our English farmers, to support the amazing work they do to feed our nation and to ensure the health and resilience of the ecosystems that we rely on. So at home, we have a landscape recovery scheme which is facilitating and funding large-scale blended finance projects to restore nature through giving farmers certainty through 20-plus year agreements. But we are also investing, as we have left the European Union, the public subsidy that was allocated through the Common Agricultural Policy is shifting to public money for public goods, whether that is paying farmers to plant trees along riverbanks to stop runoff, harmful runoff, whether it's paying farmers to store water upstream to prevent flooding further down the river into towns, and thinking about working alongside them to do large-scale landscape restoration. Internationally, we are working to unlock and to crowd in more sustainable agri-food system investment. So we were proud to stand alongside the Minister Carlos in Brazil at the launch of RAIZ, which we hope will be a dynamic platform for joint investment and cross-sector collaboration. We have worked with investment initiatives such as the Eco Business Fund and the Land Degradation Neutrality Fund. So they bring in blended finance and they have supported the sustainable management of well over 1 million hectares of land and almost 900,000 livelihoods. So some really big achievements there, putting farmers in charge and working alongside them. So the question now is, how do we crowd in more through our international climate finance to protect and restore those systems worldwide? And I think that is the challenge, that as we leave COP and go beyond, how are we going to do that extensively in more places with more people? So feel free to speak up if you'd like to announce something.
Thank you so much, Minister Gray. Whilst I have the three of you on stage, I want to move now to a topic that I personally find fascinating, and that is agriculture subsidies. One of the biggest challenges, certainly, that we face, or that I see in my work, is the ongoing misalignment of these subsidies. And I think they get a very bad rap because they came from a good place originally, but our science is better, our technology is better, our understanding of our natural environment is better, and so it is now time to ensure that our public capital flows are in alignment with these revised objectives that we face. So I'd really like to understand how countries are identifying which subsidies aren't delivering what they should. Some might be, but some might not be. And how they're redirecting support towards resilience, towards productivity, and towards nature-positive outcome. And Nick, you're in the hot seat first. How do your agricultural subsidies currently align, or they might not all align with your broader sustainability and climate goals? And more importantly, looking ahead, how can subsidy structures help to unlock additional private sector finance?
Yeah, thanks. So perhaps I'll answer this question with perhaps a quick reflection on Australia's journey when it comes to how we support our agriculture sector. So certainly in terms of like how the OECD measures producer support today, Australia would be one of the lowest subsidising countries in the world, along with New Zealand, who we sort of always like to sort of beat where we can, but typically it's quite hard to. But I think that's today, and looking back over the last 4 or 5 decades, that has not always been the case. In fact, in terms of environmental harmful subsidies, Australia used to be sort of like best in class in terms of like how not to structure agricultural support to our farmers, and certainly going back to the 50s and 60s, we had like these absurd policies around sort of superphosphate bounties. We were basically giving away fertiliser for free, and farmers, well, not surprisingly, using it like it was free, which was a lot and excessively, creating all sorts of nutrient and soil degradation challenges, and dependency on it, of course, as well, which is another challenge. And then moving through to the 70s and 80s, we had even more wilder kind of support arrangements in place. So in Australia, we at one stage had 60 different marketing bodies in Australian agriculture. So every state and territory would typically have its own marketing board for every commodity. And that was basically a single desk type arrangement where prices were set, and a government sort of marketing board controlled how much you produced and who you could sell it to, and would often then dictate how it was sort of traded either between states or exported. At one point in Australia, we used to have taxes that on cross-border trade. This is going back a while, but this is like how crazy it was earlier on. So, you know, a ton of wheat going from New South Wales to Victoria across the border would be taxed at the border. Utter madness. But, you know, you live from these lessons, you learn from these lessons and move on. So marketing boards were dismantled over kind of a 20-year period through the 80s up until about 2000. The last remaining sort of crazy policy we had in place was what was called the Wool Reserve Price Scheme. So Australia's been, and still is actually, the world's biggest producer and exporter of wool. And many Australians hark back to a day where the country was built off the sheep's back, and sort of going back through the sort of the World War II period, there was huge investment as sort of soldiers returned to the land to encourage them to sort of to build up farming enterprises, and a wool reserve price scheme was basically a price floor. So no matter what was happening in the world, you're guaranteed a minimum price. Not surprisingly, that led to an abundance of sheep in Australia, which maxed out at about 168 million sheep at one point in time. So you thought the New Zealanders liked sheep. Like we were like next level in terms of the amount of sheep we had on our country. And of course that had devastating impacts in terms of our landscape, in terms of land clearing, land degradation from way too many animals being run too intensively on too smaller blocks of land. That period was also where Australia had lots of small farm holders, but they weren't profitable. In fact, they were just dependent on all of the price support and marketing support they got from government. So it wasn't really delivering resilient, profitable farming systems. It was causing, quite significant adverse environmental impacts. And we basically had a renaissance during the 80s and 90s with significant deregulation and microeconomic reform across the entire economy, I might add, but agriculture being one of the most protected with both tariff barriers and subsidies went through significant structural change. So to give you an example, we spent 10 years clearing the wool reserve price stockpile that we'd collected over many decades of providing minimum price support. At its peak, we had 4.8 million bales of wool just sitting in warehouses waiting to be sold on the world market, and they were sold at a loss over a 10-year period. And obviously you had the rise in synthetics, which meant demand for wool dropped away quite considerably. But on the flip side, we also had this renaissance where, yes, we had farmers leave the land and we had consolidation, but we still have, and to this day, we have probably half as many farmers as we did sort of 30 or 40 years ago. But they're still family farms. 95% of farms in Australia are family farms still. The average size of a farm would be about 7,000 hectares typically, and we have plenty of cropping farms sort of probably closer to 20,000 hectares in Western Australia. So these are big enterprises, but still family run. And what that scale has enabled is precision agriculture. They've got the economies of scale. They've got a profitable business to invest in best practice land management, adopt R&D, and a lot of the support the government was providing through price support and tariff barriers was redirected to research and development principally. And so R&D led the way. And I'll stop in 1 minute. But I think most people know farming in Australia is a tough business. It's a land of bushfires and floods and droughts. There's always somewhere in Australia going through a drought. And we have ancient soils, some of the harshest soils in the world, but also today, probably one of the lowest users of farm inputs in terms of fertiliser and phosphate anywhere in the world. And the reason that's achieved is because like a laser-like focus on R&D and adoption and putting farmers at the centre of that system. So I think there are lessons there to have support better targeted at things that encourage best practice, and rather than sort of interventions that basically prevent progress in the farming sector and don't provide that incentive to be world leading in terms of R&D. And the final sentence is the double dividend of this approach is better environmental outcomes and also lower emissions footprint. A farming business that's at that frontier of best practice land management is by definition a lower emissions producer of food and fibre, and that's what the world needs.
Thank you so much for that, Nick. I'm very conscious that we're running out of time, so I'm going to ask for future remarks to be brief because I have like 3 more questions to get through. It's okay. It's a fantastic example of how the importance of lessons learned and how to refocus when you need to. But Minister Cray, I want to come to you next, and then Carlos, I'll come to you. But from the UK perspective, and I'm going to be very direct and specific, what are you doing or what are you planning to do to phase out harmful subsidies within the next? Yep.
So our investment in nature is going to rise from £800 million in 2023 to £2 billion a year by 2028. So we're going to be investing £7 billion into nature-friendly farming over the course of this Parliament. We've moved away from the old area-based subsidies, and listening to Nick, I was remembering a very sad call from my brother who spent Christmas Day on an Australian banana farm about 25 years ago. It just took me right back. It was not his best Christmas ever. But glad to say that we've played our part. My family has played our part in Australia's prosperity. He soon recovered his electrician's permit and found better work in Sydney. But we're moving to payments to farmers, as I mentioned earlier, to take actions that benefit the environment. But one of the ways that we're also thinking about where that investment goes is we're working with local authorities, with regions and local authorities to do local nature recovery strategies. So that's about bringing everybody together on a kind of regional level, saying, okay, which is the most important bit of nature in this area? You know, where are the chalk streams? Where are the salt marshes? Where are the forests? And what are we going to do to build out, to create corridors and to protect what we have? So getting local people to sign up in agreement so that we know where to direct. It's not necessary, but it's to get landowners in that area to think, okay, I'm in this. How am I going to show up for this? And we're also working with NERF, which is a nature investment readiness fund. So getting farmers to think, okay, what have I got on my land? How can I want to work with blended finance. I'm prepared to consecrate a certain amount of my land for these nature purposes, and being a sort of matchmaker, if you like, between for the marriage between finance, and farmers. And I think one of the things that financial institutions kept saying to us is like, we don't know, this is not our area. And they want to invest big chunks of money. So it's about how we stack and scale that money going in as well.
Oh, thank you so much for that. I like it. A significant investment from the UK. You heard it here first. Plus hyper-localization to deliver the transformation we need. Carlos, you're going to close out our panel today. It seems only right that Brazil has the last word. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about land restoration and how you see land restoration fitting into Brazil's broader climate environment and agriculture policy landscape. And if you want to talk about any financing mechanisms, I know you spoke before about Eco-Invest, but what else has been most successful in this space? And last word to you, Carlos. Thank you.
Bom, eu acho que nós, Brasil, já estamos no caminho certo. Nós já temos uma situação de código florestal talvez a melhor do mundo. Temos que continuar essa nova via de não desmatar e restaurar aquilo que já está presente. Aumentar a produtividade. Nós temos no Brasil 160 milhões de hectares de pastagem. Não está funcionando?
Yeah, if folks put channel 19 on the headsets, the live translation is working. Channel 19 for live translation.
Então, eu estava dizendo, estamos indo no caminho correto de transformar parte desses 160 milhões de hectares que temos disponíveis de pastagem. Essa pastagem produz muito pouco, produz menos de $100 por hectare. Nós podemos multiplicar isso por 5, essa produtividade. O Brasil pode, em poucos anos, duplicar a sua produção de produtos agrícolas. Duplicar. Em 10 anos, nós podemos duplicar. E podemos fazer com alta sustentabilidade. Eu ouvi aqui falar de subsídio, também o Brasil, quero falar de Brasil. O que o agricultor brasileiro precisa de subsídio? O Brasil tem um programa de seguro agrícola muito ruim, talvez um dos piores do mundo. E agora, com essas mudanças climáticas, cada vez é mais necessário que a gente tenha, ao invés de financiamento barato, seguros adequados para que venham cobrir esses problemas que já começaram a acontecer. Vocês sabem, eu sou do Rio Grande do Sul, acabou de ter seca ou enchente no Rio Grande do Sul, inúmeros problemas que vêm afetando a nossa agricultura. Então eu diria, continuar melhorando as áreas degradadas, investir dinheiro nisso, mas temos que ter um programa de seguro adequado para suportar essas mudanças climáticas que o mundo está enfrentando.
Wonderful. Thank you, Carlos, for that. That was absolutely fantastic. Folks, I want to give our first panel a massive round of applause. Thank you all for your time, for your contributions. What I loved about this panel was we hear a lot about the challenges in the agriculture space, the lack of R&D, the need for more innovation, the need to put farmers first and center. And you heard from these three governments real-life examples of how they were putting those challenges, they were overcoming those challenges and putting real action into practice. Now, folks, I'm delighted to invite our next panel on stage. We have a fantastic group that was going to really bring the farmer investment and business perspective to life. I'd love to invite Ian Proudfoot first. If you can join me on stage, Ian. Ian is the Global Head of Agribusiness of KPMG. Next, I'd like to welcome Elizabeth and Samela Dala, who is the President of the Eastern Africa Farmers Federation. And again, last but certainly not least, I'd like to welcome Juliano Assunção, the Executive Director of the Climate Policy Initiative here in Brazil. Welcome all. Now, before we kind of get into our questions, I again would love to give you guys the opportunities to make some opening remarks. Ian, specifically for you, I'd love to understand what conditions do you think are needed for finance for sustainable agriculture to be scaled from your and KPMG's perspective?
Thanks, Morgan. Good afternoon, everybody, and it's great to have the opportunity to talk a little bit about the way we're seeing the world at the moment. We are very, very focused on how we transition food systems from where they are today to a more sustainable futures. And when we look about sustainable futures in agriculture, it's how you balance equity and access to food, affordability of food, the sustainability of production of food, the nutrition that food delivers, and the economic outcomes. And unlike most economic challenges where you're trying to balance maybe one or two factors, here you're trying to balance 5. So it is a really significant challenge. But when it comes to capital, the message that's come through incredibly clearly with our work from the very largest agricultural businesses in the world right the way down to smallholding farmers right across the globe is capital flows drive what grows. And that's quite a simple way to put it, really. Historically, the agriculture sector has really struggled to attract diversified farming sources. So you look at where the money has come from, it's generally come from government or it's come from philanthropic organisations. The reality is that, why has that occurred? We look at it, market distortions. I'm glad you've already addressed subsidies, because otherwise I would have had a go. Coming from New Zealand, which is the country that outdoes Australia in terms of lower subsidies, you know, it has undoubtedly driven a more productive, more economic, and more innovative agricultural sector by freeing farmers. Farmers are inherently innovative people, yet we destroy their innovation by tying them to subsidies. It makes no sense at all. Volatile returns has really put off external capital coming in, so both commodity price movements, but also biology, the inherent biology of farming systems. You know, the concept of 1 in 7 bad years. It drives outcomes that are creating challenges. So, but what we are seeing, and I think there is some really positive news, is that we are seeing far more private capital interested in coming into the agri sector, and coming from a whole range of different places. Why are they interested? One, there is a really compelling narrative around the opportunity in agriculture. The system is going through its greatest change in the next 25 years that it's had for 13,000 years of formal cultivation. There is a story and there is an investment narrative there that makes a lot of sense to people. Secondly, agri-assets offer the biological hedge for a lot of funds, a lot of investors. That ability to have an investment that does give them a true connection to nature is becoming far more important as we start to think about the relationship between nature and climate and successful business. Third reason, food security. So we're seeing a lot of funds that are getting interested in agriculture because of the fact they either are sovereign wealth funds and they've got an inherent interest in securing their own food supplies, or they can see the social benefits to their business and to their communities from greater food security. Overall, where we've reached the conclusion is we've got to focus on how we utilize 100% of what we grow. So often we target a food product or a fiber product and we don't necessarily think about the byproducts and co-products. I agree entirely with the comments made earlier that it's getting incredibly difficult for farmers to make a living from just selling the targeted products. You know, we know up to 30% of farmers are likely to walk off the land in the next decade. So how do you present that option to have a package of solutions? Well, for me at the moment, it comes down to a couple of key things. Farmers must present investable opportunities to the market. That's why it was great to hear the Minister talk about how the government can act as a connector and a scaler. to enable an investor to be able to write an investment at the right ticket size for them, but to ensure that gets shared. Secondly, there must be a clear story about how the business is going to interact and engage with innovation. How is it going to use technology? How is it going to bring AI to play in its business? How is it going to benefit from data? All those factors will create change. Thirdly, we think it's critical there's a regenerative mindset in the business. It's clear about how the business and its relationship with nature is going to be cemented and strengthened over time. We also believe it's critical there must be regulatory certainty. That could be around tariffs. At the moment, the trade challenges are making it really difficult to work out how to invest in agriculture, and we are seeing people pulling back currently. But it's also about subsidies. It's also about other policies surrounding agricultural sector, labour availability being a key one at the moment. And then the final point is the farmer's mindset. The farmer, and the comments Nick made about the cultural connection with food, the long time people have been on the land, doing things the way your father did it and the way your grandfather did it is inherent in the sector. So overcoming that connection and having a belief that by partnering with external financial business can go further faster is, to my mind, a critical part of how you drive change. So that's sort of where we're seeing it at the moment.
Thank you so much, Ian. And I'm conscious, Elizabeth, as the president of the East Africa Farmers Federation, and we've engaged in many of these international panels. We've spent about an hour talking about farmers, and yet it's the first time we're actually going to be hearing from a farmer. And so I'd love to hear, if you want any reactions or reflections to what you've heard so far today, or specifically for the context of this panel, what kinds of financial support have you used that have actually been successful in enabling you or the farmers within your association to expand their own sustainable farming practices?
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks for the opportunity to be part of this panel to share the perspectives of farmers. So as introduced, I'm Elizabeth Nsimadala. I'm a smallholder farmer from Uganda and the president of the Eastern Africa Farmers Federation. This is a regional body that brings together national farmers associations and cooperatives in the 10 Eastern African countries. And we represent more than 25 million smallholder farmers that are in all value chains. So I'm glad to be speaking after Ian, and it's really an interesting conversation. So our strategy is anchored on enhancing smallholder agriculture as a rewarding investment opportunity. And part of the challenges that he has mentioned, as a farmer organizations, we've really oriented ourselves in terms of addressing those challenges. And that's why we believe in the strength of our numbers. That's why we've come together into cooperatives and farmers associations to be able to put to scale the concept of aggregation. We've embraced digitization. At your free time, you can Google for e-granary initiative, where we are collecting data on our farmers to know where they are, what they're doing, the size of their land, their input demands, and the service demands, and we are using that data to be able to secure markets for them. We are also investing in institutional capacity strengthening of our members. They participate in policy processes, but most importantly in economic services. And this takes me to where you mentioned about farmers organizations coming up with bankable proposals. Again, our focus is also a huge focus is around resilience in general, and where we are focusing on climate change, but also on sustainable agriculture, including regenerative agriculture, agroecology, whether it is climate smart agriculture, whether it is farm practices. I don't know, all these are just buzzwords, but for us, it means, farming in practices that are nature positive. And on this, we've also interested ourselves in international and global conversations, and that's why I'm here speaking on behalf of the farmers. What I want to really point out, especially in terms of financing, especially to the question that you posted, I think the most important financing that we've really leveraged on and which is never mentioned about is the financing and the investment by the farmers. I think for me that is the primary investment because collectively we are the biggest private sector investors. But nobody ever speaks about this kind of investment that the farmers make. So we've also gone ahead to access grants. I know we've been supported by international NGOs, but also international development partners for the last more than 10 years. We've been supported by FAO, institutions like IFAD, by the European Union. And this support has gone into supporting us in building our institutional capacity, economic services, in how do we do business, but also in terms of doing sustainable agriculture. Most of our farmers in my constituents have also benefited from government subsidies because most of our governments have embraced subsidies. And I want to point out what I would call one of those successful ones in Rwanda under the CDAT program, where they brought together private sector, they brought together government, they've got this subsidy from the World Bank, and they're also working with farmers. One of our members, Ingabo Syndicate, is benefiting from this kind of support at a lower interest rate. And then there's also credit. Some of our cooperatives and farmers associations have also benefited from credit. And I know, for example, institutions like CRDB Bank in Tanzania and the Uganda Development Bank have GCF funds. But the biggest challenge with these funds is the cost of collateral. And that's why most of our farmers, most of our cooperatives are not able to access these funds because the cost of collateral is so high. To access these funds, you need to have a title deed. And also the cost of the title deed must be 100%. Where you don't have a title deed, either you need a functional storage facility, and the cost of this collateral has to be more than 120%. So which makes financing not accessible by the smallholder farmers, because how many of our cooperatives and farmers associations have this kind of collateral? So that's why in total, they've not really lent out more than 30%, even when the funds are there, but they are not accessible. Then finally, we have also private investments. There are so many private investors that have partnered with some of our member cooperatives and farmers associations. In Uganda, for example, we have New Cafe, the National Union of Coffee and Agri-Farm Enterprises. We also have Oromia Coffee Cooperative Union in Ethiopia that have partnered with private investors to support sustainable agriculture within their organizations. And the final one is around insurance, especially weather index insurance within the region. I know, for example, government of Kenya has invested in livestock insurance, and some of our member organizations have also been able to access such kind of insurance policy. Having said that, and having mentioned all these financing that we've accessed, but still, those are just drops in an ocean, and they can only give us small islands of success. So again, it still remains a challenge with smallholder farmers accessing especially direct funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for that. It's a fantastic overview and actually quite a lot of insights, I think, into both the challenges and opportunities that the smallholder farmers face. Juliano, I want to come to you next. I mean, we haven't really talked a lot about enabling policy environments, which seems very bizarre at a COP, and I recognize that subsidy reform is absolutely one of those clear mechanisms. But given we have you from CPI, I'd love to understand from your perspective, what policy reforms can be delivered to help to unlock finance at scale? What are the policies that we need nationally, subnationally to help move the money?
Right, thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity of being here and to join this very interesting and needed conversation. And and I really agree that we need somehow to be problem-driven, and the fact that, I think in all of the interventions here, we have this idea of putting farmers in the center, and I think it's quite crucial. I'd like to start with three facts and three issues that are quite relevant on the broader discussion. And the facts are about, if you look at the FAO data, it shows that we've been able to increase agricultural production at a global scale primarily through productivity gains in the last 25 years. So the idea that we can produce more in an existing cleared lands is more than a theoretical possibility. It's something that is happening at a global scale for a while, right? But still, and that's the second fact, we still have a lot of deforestation. And in tropical areas alone, we have more than 10 million hectares of forest loss, every year in the last decade. So we really need to better balance, how we are managing the land, and there is some hope on that front. And the third fact is also the existence of many high-performance agricultural practices that are positive for the environment. So if you sum up these three facts, I think they point to a kind of a promising future in the sense that, we need somehow to put in practice, things that exist around the world. But in order to do so, we need to face some issues. And these are the issues to me, and the way that we're framing it, at least in our work, is around it's about around three things. First, we need to make sure that farmers have the information about what's the better practice and the better technology, the best technology that they can implement in that particular context, right? So technology dissemination along with innovation is very important. And the fact that we have so much variation in terms of productivity in a given context, it shows there's a lot of room for put in place technology dissemination structures. And the other two issues are around the provision of financial services that was mentioned here before, right? The first one, we need to make sure that these farmers, they have access to the credits to finance the upfront costs that involves in the adoption of many of those practices. And finally, we need to make sure these farmers have the tools to deal with the risks associated with implementation of those practices, right? So at a broad level, being able to make sure these farmers have the best information and they have the tools not only to finance, but also to deal with the risks associated with those practices, as mentioned here many times, I think it's super important. And then with that in perspective, it's how we usually go to the specific context, in the national, subnational context, right? Each country and each state face a different configuration of opportunities and challenges. So in the case of Brazil, we have, as Mr. Carlos was mentioning before, we have this big subsidized credit policy. And at the same time, there is very limited risk management tools available to the farmers. And we also have very limited access to extension services. So just to give you an idea, one of the most important credit lines of our subsidized credit program in Brazil is associated with the restoration of unproductive pastures, right? So there's money for them. And then at CPI, we ran a report in which we looked at the impact of those, channeling credit loans to those farmers. And it turns out that, 4 years after the loans is made, nothing really happened in the area that was supposed to be restored, right? Working to show the importance of extension services, right? In other instances of CPI, we're working with platforms. So we have this platform that we call the lab that try to identify opportunities for financial innovation, try to identify areas to reach, an agribusiness service provider or a farmer, can have something that will make a difference at scale, but for somehow can't get, the impact it's supposed to do because it lacks the finance that is proper to that specifically need. So the work of the lab is pretty much to identify those ideas and to provide some matchmaking with possible investors and so on. In other areas, we've been working through small companies that are, service providers and supporting them in order to get access to investors to increase their outreach and so on and so forth. So in a nutshell, I think it's important to at the same time have this center, put the farmer in the center and understanding what are the issues that are preventing those farmers to adopt the best practices that are available, for agriculture that have positive impacts on nature, and then work from there rather than starting, designing mechanisms, and aggregate and then try to form a pipeline. And with that, I'll hand back to you. Thank you.
No, that was fantastic, and I think it's actually a very good framing. So I'm going to be very provocative now. We have had a large number of questions come in from the Slido, which, to be honest, I am surprised by. I never expect these technological advances to work the way that they should. And so if you guys are brave enough, I'm going to pivot now to this. But one of the first questions, Giuliano, was, do you think that we capitalize on the lessons learned from successful investments in sustainable agriculture? And because I'm the moderator, I have the prerogative. My response to this is I think there's been a lot of successful pilots, but nothing yet big enough to kind of give wholesale confidence in this. And so my nuance to this question is, how can we move from pilots to something at scale? But to any of the folks on the panel today, do you guys think we're capitalizing where we're seeing successful investments in sustainable agriculture? Ian or Elizabeth?
No, I can take that. I think there are two elements to your question. One is on the design on financial solutions, right? There is a recurrent approach to this issue, which is to design a new credit line to put in the system. But this is pretty much a retail operation, that is really hard to manage. So most of the time, it's much more important to take the existing funds and the existing structures and try to better align them rather than to create another thing that will be, there, but without any impact on scale. And the other thing is about, identifying practices that are much more aligned with, the performance of agriculture. So in Brazil, I can give an example, which is the no-till agriculture. It was developed to deal with erosion issues in the southern Brazil. And it turns out that it became very effective way of doing soybean plantation and has a very good impact on climate. There are some other side effects in terms of the use of chemicals and so on and so forth. But in terms of the carbon balance, it's quite beneficial. So I think it's important to look around what are the structures and what to have that's already operating at scale to me.
Ian and well, go to Ian first, and then Elizabeth, come to you.
I think there are lots of good examples where pilots are happening, but very often what we find in terms of how you're trying to move from pilot to scale is the market sufficient to support the opportunity. So it's not just a question of have you got the right finance market available, but have you got the right customers available that are going to pay the price to support the business? Because ultimately it's got to become economically viable. And what we see very often, farmers are really smart business people. They will look and if they're investing $1, they want to know there's going to be 2 in the bank account at the end of the year in terms of return. So they want to see that nexus to the market. And that often is the constraint because the market hasn't been developed in advance of the sustainable project or pilot happening. So that's my observation.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Elizabeth, what's your perspective on this?
Yeah, thank you. I think for me, it's really by design that we just keep implementing pilots. It's just a lip service that is given by development partners. Why am I saying that it's by design? Most of the development partners are interested in only supporting pilots. And everyone just speaks about scaling, and no one is investing in the scaling of most of these successes. So I think we really need to get intentional, especially when we are talking about these things, and especially when we are speaking about farmer centricity. We are getting fatigued as farmers because of these empty speeches. We can't be speaking about farmer centricity and farmers are just receiving 0.36 of climate financing directly, I think it means that something is wrong somewhere. We really need to see how we can redesign our strategies and make sure that we get financing direct to the farmers. We need participatory approaches, we need inclusive approaches, we need to give technical assistance facility for farmers to be able to understand, to have financial literacy, but also be able to understand some of these sustainable agricultural practices. And we need to have targeted and tailor-made financing for the smallholder farmers if we are to create an impact. Otherwise, if we are not ready to do that, then let's be ready to keep coming to these different COPs and other international meetings with empty speeches and empty promises, and the farmers will never receive the money. Thank you.
No, I think very fair comments. We have about 10 minutes left, and there's quite a few questions here, but one that I want to pick up on, because we haven't actually talked about it much, is on data and how data can be used for various stakeholders, policymakers, farmers, investors, and others to help to accelerate capital flows. The question here is specifically, how can nature metrics and biodiversity data be used to help boost investor confidence in sustainable agriculture? I think there's a broader question about data writ large, and we've had a lot of conversations through another platform we supported called Regen 10 on bigger questions around data. Who owns the data? Does the farmer own the data? Are they going to get paid for the data? And once the data is shared, how do the benefits go back to the farmer? So I'd love to hear your guys' perspective on this interplay between data availability, the need for robust data to unlock confidence from key stakeholders, and maybe some of the trade-offs we need to consider in terms of ownership. Don't all jump in. I mean, I like everyone wants to jump in first. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Yeah. No,
Maybe keep your reflections to 2 to 3 minutes.
Okay, cool. Well, I think data, and more than data, I think the digital world is quite interesting nowadays, especially for reaching out people that are isolated. And farmers usually they are physically isolated, but the digital world provides a way of getting more connected. So, especially in the terms in a way in which, in a moment in which climate is changing so much, having systems in place that will inform these farmers, not only in terms of practice, but how to deal with weather will be important, as long as with ways of providing to banks and investors a kind of a monitoring system of what they're funding, because you can monitor a lot of things through satellite. And in Brazil, we've been doing quite a bit of advancement on those fronts, connecting banks with using satellite imagery to understand and monitor what's going on the ground. Yeah.
Thanks, Juliano. Ian, and then Elizabeth will close with you.
So I had the pleasure of spending 4 days in San Francisco in March at World Agri-Tech and Future Food Tech. And there was 10 panels a day, every day. And there was every single panel referred to AI as a critical driver of the future of the food system. One of the big challenges I see, though, when I talk to our clients around the world, is they all believe their data is super valuable and therefore are really keen to try and keep it as tight as possible. Whereas data maximizes its value when it has friends and when it's shared with other organizations. So I think what we're lacking, and I see repeated country by country, Australia is actually a good example where they've got the Australian Data Exchange for Agriculture, and that's really starting to drive the ability to fuse data together. So it's creating the platforms to share data, but equally it's setting the foundations to collect that data, whether it's nature-based data, or economic performance data, or whatever. And the beauty for agriculture is we have no legacy systems in data. We were very slow to move into a world of a digitalized sector. So we can jump straight to the latest AI. And we know that the big tech players are very keen to help take us there. The question then becomes how you create the right scaled access points for everybody to access that.
Just to build on that, and then Elizabeth, I'll let you close us out. I had the privilege of being at the WAFI conference in China just a few months ago, where they announced not 1, not 2, but 3 new large language models building off of their different agricultural universities' data sets. and they did a live demonstration of talking to AI to say, can you genome sequence me a drought-resistant form of teff that can be produced in Ethiopia? And the AI bot started pulling the different genome sequencing together to respond to this. What I found interesting is that it's all in Chinese. And so there's very little interoperability for other research organizations to utilize this without some sort of translation at scale. So these data hubs are sitting, that was an interesting example of data hubs sitting in different places, but the power of what data could do for good in this space. Elizabeth, please close us out.
Thank you very much. On the issue of data, I think for me what I see as a biggest challenge is that every partner wants to be a data expert. They want to invest in their own data, and there is lack of data convergence. And who listens to the farmer in this whole issue on data collection? Because as farmers, we are sources of primary data. Any other data is secondary and tertiary. But no one is willing to listen to the farmer, to invest in the farmer, to support the farmer. And you know why? It's because most of these people who are into this data business are selling a service to the farmers. And yet for us as farmers, we are offering a service to our members. Even when we make profit, in our business, the profit is plowed back into the farmers' associations and cooperatives. So I think for me, my call would be for the development partners and any other who would like to invest in data to really work with the farmers, support the farmers, and that is the whole issue and aspect of co-creation to make sure that we co-create all these initiatives. As a parting shot, I know we discussed data. As farmers, our issue has been direct access to financing. And so that's why, as global, we have a global initiative called Family Farmers for Climate Action. We are about 11 organizations, regional and global, representing 95 million family farmers. And together, we are advocating for direct access to financing. We are discussing ways of how we can create a farmer fund, a funding that can be directly accessed by farmers, a fund that is going to reduce intermediaries, a fund that is going to reduce all those phantom organizations that are receiving funding on behalf of the farmers. So I really invite all of you to join us in this co-creation process. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Elizabeth. And thank you to all of our speakers and to everyone here in the room and online for your engagement throughout the session. If we can give our speakers a round of applause, you guys can go ahead and take your seats. Now, it's up to me to close this out today, and I really appreciate everyone sticking with us. I love the challenges of COP30 with the sound, the rain, the thunder. But what we've heard today, and something that I personally deeply believe in, is that the opportunity to transform our food systems is absolutely real. And in my personal opinion, the pathway to that implementation is more clear than it ever has been before. What we've heard today, thank you. What we've heard today from our countries is that they are already showing where public policy is meeting farmer needs, where private investment is lining up, and where sustainable agriculture is becoming both the climate solution and an economic driver of growth and of job creation. We have also heard fairly consistent messages of the obstacles that we're facing and the obstacles and the challenges that we need to take on direct financing for farmers, as Elizabeth has so clearly spoken about. The ongoing misalignment of public finance, the difficulty of scaling what works, moving from pilots and beyond, and the need for better risk sharing so that farmers and investors can move together in lockstep together. Now, across these discussions, for me, there's three things that sort of stand out. As I said at the outset, and what I will keep repeating, the solutions already exist. I think, as you guys have said, we don't need to keep creating new things. We know it works. From restoration models in Brazil to new financial structures in Australia and the UK, we are absolutely not starting from zero. The challenge is really now replication at scale. Number two, the policy environment does matter, right? It is the groundwork for how we all engage. So getting subsidies, incentives, and data right and aligned can help to shift these billions towards soil health, towards resilience, and towards productivity. And we've heard today that some countries are already starting to make those shifts. And finally, collaboration is non-negotiable. As an American standing here in a world where multilateralism sometimes feels like it's falling apart, it's heartening to be at a COP. It's heartening to stand on stage with Elizabeth and others who recognize that we cannot do this alone. Farmers cannot do this alone, but neither can governments and neither can investors. So scaling sustainable agriculture requires co-design. It requires all of us sharing risks together, and it requires ensuring that we have the financial commitments, the policy reforms, and the country-to-country collaboration that will unlock the investment at scale. So, on behalf of the Food and Land Use Coalition, FOLU, thank you all for your leadership, thank you for your time, and we look forward to working with you as we build the partnerships and investment pathways that we need. Obrigado. Thank you so much.